Okay, so I'm live. I'm going to give it a couple minutes though. Sure. Sure. Be that way. I probably should have just done it in Discord, but I already got set up, so I'm just going to go with it. Mm-hmm. Yep. Sure. Yep. See a couple people trickling in. Okay, and if anyone wants to follow along with what I'm doing, I did take a copy of the Team Red spreadsheet. I've just called it Snail Racing Team Enduro Manager and is in the general shared folder under demo, which any driver in the Snail Racing Daytona 24 charity for endometriosis run should have access to this general shared folder. You will now also see this demo folder. If you wanted to, you could actually open this up with me and you will see where I am in real time and the changes that I'm making in real time as well. I think we'll go ahead and get started. It's being recorded anyhow. It's not super important that everyone's in here. Okay. Um, let's just talk about a couple of really, really high level things to begin with. First of all, understand that it does look pretty intimidating the first time you open it up, just because there's quite a lot that's laid bare all at once. That's okay. That's a normal reaction. I don't think anyone has ever. Actually, no, I take that back. I've seen exactly one person say that this all looks very straightforward. Everybody else just kind of goes, "Whoa, what the hell?" It's not as complex as it looks, I guarantee you, as far as using it, but it does take a little bit of getting used to. So the first thing to be aware of before we start doing anything here, there's this color key up here. I wonder if I can blow that up. No, I can't. So we've got this color key up here in the upper left. So this tells you that if you're doing well, something is within tolerance or better than expected, it's probably going to be color coded green. If something's not going well, a stint took too long, you're going to be out of fuel, something like that, then probably it's going to look red, right? If it's yellow, those are the only fields that you should actually be changing, right? So out of all this stuff that's going on here, the only things that you should or can change by default are the things that are this sort of yellowish color, right? So these guys here, the lap times, your lap fuel and burn, it's setting up the basic overview information and fuel stint configs. All this other stuff that's either white or gray. Hold on one sec. I'm getting an echo. Just gonna bring his user volume down for me. Okay. Um, so anything that's not yellow is automatically calculated. So don't try to change it, which brings me to one of the other, before we sort of jump into the features. So only try to change things that are yellow. And if you try to change something that isn't yellow, I'll just try to put anything in any field here. I'm going to put the word test in this field. You're going to get this error here. It's going to say, hey, you're trying to edit something that the guy who made it thinks you probably shouldn't edit. Are you sure you want to do that? No, you're not sure. I'm going to tell you that right now. Just don't, just back out. It canceled. Don't change it. So the most common time I've seen this come up is, for example, people try to change their driver names here, right? But this is done automatically for you. Or people try to figure out their own lap times and that sort of thing, and they try to plug that in here. It's calculated for you, right? So anytime you see that, hey, are you sure you want to change something? There's a really good chance that you're trying to change something that's automatically calculated and doing the work for you. So just back out of it. And if you have any questions about not seeing a number or a value or something that you expected to see that you were trying to enter yourself, let me know, and I will point you in the right direction for where you should actually be changing that. Okay, the next thing is you might see, again, before we kind of get into like the functionality of the sheet, this does have a custom menu that for the most part, average users aren't going to care too much about, except for updating driver colors. Okay. Yeah, I just turned his volume down for me, so it's no longer showing up for me. But yes, that is correct. Okay. So this menu up here with Sassy config, this just has a few. There's some limitations with Google Sheets functionality, such that I had to write some code to be able to do some things, and that's what these are. Okay. So if you want to update your driver colors, for example, you go on the roster, set the correct background colors, and then you can update the driver color here, and it will go and find all the places where the cells are color coded by driver, and it will update all of the color rules for you. So you don't have to worry about it. You only have to change it in a roster and then do this. However, with the way that Google Apps is set up, any kind of script like this has I want to get too far into it, but without kind of going a little bit overkill, more overkill even, and hosting this code somewhere and going through certification, all that kind of thing, which I don't really want to do. If you try to use any of this, it's going to tell you that, hey, this dude's probably trying to hack you. Are you sure you want that to happen? And the code is available to anyone who wants to see it, but the first time you try to use one of these menu items, you are going to get a nasty gram about that. So I'll go ahead and do that. And actually, the colors are off a little bit right now. So let's go ahead and update the colors. So you see the color's a little bit funny here, probably because I uh, copied a cell down here. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to get the warning. You see this? So we see authorization required. Script attached to this document needs your permission to run. I'm going to hit continue, and it's going to say, hey, I don't know who this dude is who wrote the script. They're not trusted. This is dangerous. Don't do that. Which typically is correct. So you see Google hasn't verified the app because I have not and will not be going through the verification process. So if you want to use any of these features, like changing driver color and that sort of thing, you have to click this advanced here in the bottom left. And that tells you that you are accepting risk that I, Pete, will not be hacking you. And then you can click this link down here. So again, it's going to show it to you like this. There's going to be no link that you can click to move forward. You have to click this advanced, and then you have to click go to Enduro Manager scripts. And if anyone's interested, it is open source in quotes, in that anyone can see it, anyone can change it on their copy of their sheet to do whatever they want. There's no secret script or anything like that. It's all sitting there like it's in a text file. You can see exactly what I wrote. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click that. It's going to tell you that it needs access to all your Google Sheets. Unfortunately, there was no permission set that I could set to just have it edit. And that's all I wanted. So it can do create and delete. It can do more than it should be able to. But again, it's just sort of an artifact with the Google permissions. So if you agree to that, you're comfortable with that, you can allow it. Since I wrote it, I am very comfortable with that. So now if I go up here, from here on out, you only have to do that once. Now I can run through this update drivers. You can see up here in the middle, it's kind of running, and we see that Larry changed from, he had the same color as Ash, which was incorrect, because if we look at the roster, it's looking at these colors, right? So Larry was supposed to be green, but his color was wrong. So now that we ran that script, we see that it updated the color here, and it updated the color in driver availability, and it updated the color in the schedule. So this one menu item will go through every single place that driver colors are used, and you can change your colors at will, no problem. Reset driver availability is going to set everything to blocked. Be very careful with that if that's not what you intended to do. The reason that that's in there is so when I'm setting up new versions of the sheet, I don't have to go through and reset all the schedule by hand. That's why this is here, but that's what it will do. It on the driver availability, it's going to set everything, all this to blocked. Okay. Okay, so I think that covers the main big thing. So again, only change yellow things, and if you want to update driver colors or do anything with this menu, just be aware there's kind of that nastygram, and if you get this thing, hit cancel, or I'm not responsible for what happens next, and I will make all sorts of unsavory jokes at your expense while I'm fixing it because it's probably not going to be easy to fix. Okay. Okay, so setting up the roster. So I have backed out some of the changes here just so I can sort of explain what we're looking at. So again, this is not on the actual sheet. I made a copy of this. So just so you know, driver name, pretty straightforward. If you have less drivers than this, starting at the bottom, just delete them. Right, so literally just hit delete. That's it. That's all you have to do. You don't have to worry about anything else. The rest of the sheet can figure it out. The only thing that's going to happen here is you will have some extra columns, right? Because I just removed Larry. Now I've got this extra column here, and you can hide that column if you want. To set these up for all the teams for the Daytona 24 charity run, I've already hidden these columns for the appropriate team size, etc. But that's really all you have to do. So however many drivers you have, start here and start filling their names in one by one, and it will be happy. Okay. Total stints and fair share, you can see these are not yellow, which means you should not be changing them. So if I say I want to do, I'm looking at this and I say, oh, I want to do 12 total stints, I'm going to put this in. It's going to say, hey, you're not supposed to change that. What are you doing, right? So hit cancel because as it turns out, this is the total scheduled stints. This is not their preference. This is telling you how many have actually been scheduled for them. Okay. Fair share rule is something that's going to be automatically calculated. So the math on this one, this is probably actually another thing to mention. You see these little black arrows at the top of all these labels? That means there's a hover over tooltip that explains what this column is, and they're everywhere. Every visible column in the sheet will tell you what it is if you hover over the label. Okay. So fair share in particular is 25% of an equal share. So if there's 4 drivers, an equal share would be 25% of the total laps, and then 1/4 of that 25% is what's required for fair share. So this just keeps track of it for you. Basically, if you've got 6 drivers and everyone's doing a couple hours, you're probably going to be okay. Right? And again, driver color. This is up to you if you want to change it. If you want to change it, you do the normal. If you're familiar with Excel or Sheets, there's nothing fancy about this. This is the only exception to things that you should be changing unless they're yellow. It's the only place on the whole sheet where you can change something that isn't yellow. So let's say we want to make Larry blue. I would just change the color. And then because this doesn't, Google Sheets isn't smart enough to give me a way to reference that, I had to use JavaScript. So this is where this menu comes in, right? So now I do update driver colors and you'll see that green turn to blue. And that will be the case every single place Larry is mentioned. We see that turn to blue on the schedule. Now he's blue. Driver ability, he's blue. Even on the chart, it will have changed to blue. Okay. So again, back on the roster, GMT offset. So this is not necessarily time zone because time zones can be very strange and they can have political rules and all kinds of things, right? So I don't care if you're in Central or something like that. Just put how far off of GMT do you want it to think you are when you're putting in time. So I happen to have their offsets here. So I'm just going to plug those in and then we'll play with them a little bit and move them around so you can see what happens as these things change. Okay. All right. Okay. I did just change this label because it was a little bit misleading. So um, this is for a driver saying how many stints they're willing to do in a row. Okay, so it's not overall. So if somebody wants to do, 2 2-hour stints, they would set this to 2. right? And what'll happen is if somebody tries to schedule them for 3 stints in a row, it's going to show up with a notification, a little indication that says, "Hey, this driver said they only want to do 2, and you just scheduled them for 3." It won't stop you from doing that. It's just for your information. Okay, so that's everything that's on the roster tab. Any questions so far on roster? I think that's probably the easiest bit. Okay. All right, cool. So then the next thing, as a driver in particular, that you're interested in, and as someone who's managing the event, what you really want your drivers to do next is head on over to the driver availability tab. Okay, so the first thing to keep in mind here is this is not stints. All right, these are half-hour increments. You can see 9 p.m., 9:30 p.m., 10 p.m., 10:30 p.m., 11 p.m., 11:30. Okay, so what it's going to do is it's going to say wherever the um, the race start was, so the actual green flag, whenever the green flag dropped, that's going to be the time it uses here, and then it's just going to go in half-hour increments. Okay, what's going to happen here is the drivers are going to say every half hour of the whole race, I'm either blocked, I'm tentative, or I'm open. Okay. And the rule is what's coded in is, for example, stint one is almost an hour. So it's going to cover these 2 rows. So for somebody to be open for stint one, they have to be open for the whole thing, right? They can't just leave in the middle of the stint. That's not open, right? They're not available to be scheduled. So they have to, for both of these rows, they have to say open. Okay, if one of these rows says blocked, blocked trumps everything. If you're blocked for any part of a stint, based on here, it's going to list you as blocked on the schedule. Okay, and then the next thing it's going to look for is whether you're tentative on anything, and tentative is going to take priority over open. So if you're, um, and we can demonstrate that real quick. So let's say, let's pick on Klaus real quick. So he's open for both of these right now. Okay, now if I set this to blocked, what's that look like? It looks like he can drive right away, right? I mean, that's sort of like your gut reaction is. So he says he's open right away when the green flag drops. So I can schedule him for first stint. But the problem is, first stint's going to go beyond 2 p.m. It's going to bleed into this stretch between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. And he says he can't do that. So you can't schedule him for the whole stint. So if you go back to the schedule, we'll see it now shows him as being blocked for the first 2 stints, right? And again, the reason for that is this half hour is part in stint one and part in stint two. Okay, and the sheet is figuring all of that out for you. You do not have to and should not be thinking about it as a driver when you're filling this out. All we need to know is per the time of day on the clock on the wall for every half hour increment for this 24-hour stretch. Are you available? Are you tentative? Which basically means you can run if you really have to, but you'd rather not, or you block. You're just not available. Okay. And as the race ebbs and flows, how many stints are available? If somebody crashes halfway through, that means they're going to do less stints, all that kind of thing. It's going to refer back to this driver availability to figure out, hey, is the driver that you had scheduled still available or not? And it will let you know if something has changed. Okay. So this should be something that's happening right away. If you're the team lead, if you don't have a team lead and you're interested enough to be watching this, congratulations and condolences. You are the team lead. You want to have all of your drivers come in here and do this as soon as you possibly can so you can start banging out a rough schedule. Okay. And then once this is set, you should never have to change it. Right now, the race might change quite a bit, but if a driver wasn't available between noon and 1 o'clock, they're not going to ever be available between noon and 1 o'clock. The tool will account for it. Okay. Um, we talked about days for okay. I made kind of a big stink about. Oh, hold on. There's one other thing I wanted to do. Okay. So talking about priority again. So again, if you're blocked for any part of it, it doesn't matter if you were open or tentative or anything here. The schedule's still going to say blocked for this step. Okay. Now, if I say that I'm tentative and then I'm open, it's going to say tentative for that first stint because I said I'm not quite sure if I want to race this first half hour. So on the schedule sheet, it's now going to show you as tentative for that first block because it found a half hour period that falls within the stint that said you were tentative. So it doesn't care that the other part was open. Any questions about that? Sure. Yep. Yep. Yeah, it's the last thing I have to do before I release this version of the sheet is have it automatically manipulate the column sizes and counts and all that kind of thing. Now, if you want to, now this is the only time, and I mentioned this in the Discord, if you just want to hide and show columns, that's okay. It's not going to break anything, right? So what you do here is you see these arrows up at the top, and if there's a hidden row, it'll be on the left. Just click on the arrow, and you're going to get this thing. And this is okay now. It's the only time this is okay, right? And you'll see that, hey, there's an extra driver slot here. Now, mhm, yeah, you can hide that. Yep, correct. Yep. Um, and that's going to be the rule moving up to day 224. If this goes well, then great. Any bug fixes, anything like that, I'm going to put in here. And then the next version of this will be every time you change the driver, it'll just add and remove the columns for you. But for today, yep, you can hide and show whatever you like. And you can see there's the same thing over on local times and the same thing on the schedule tab. So there you go. So if you want to hide those, that's fine. Oh, sure. I have not been paying attention to chat, huh? Okay, so this is in the stream chat. Gotcha. Okay. So, D saying, try to change the race start time in the overview. In case we choose a different time slot, I expected it to update on driver, but it didn't. Is that expected? Yeah, it is. So this is something I should have mentioned, right? So if you change the start time of the race in the overview, and we'll get to that in a moment, it's going to change when this starts, but it doesn't know that it's supposed to change all this stuff right now. So you should probably, well, not probably, you should figure out what session you're starting with first, because otherwise all this stuff is going to be weird, right? So if you decide you're going to do this 12 hours later, it doesn't know that you're supposed to move tentative to 12 hours later. None of this stuff from here to here is going to change. So you'll have to, kind of do that manually. Um, it's a good shout that it's probably something that I should have it think about, but today it does not. So that is a current limitation. Okay. Another thing, I made a big think about if you want to copy and paste big sections. So you can see these are all drop downs, right? You know, that kind of thing. I don't know why that one's white, but whatever. If you don't want to do every single one of these, you could do, let's say I'm going to be tentative. You can go all the way down and you can either control V or control D, and that's all fine. Okay. What you cannot do is say, okay, I want to be tentative. Oops. I want to say that Tom and Ash are both tentative up till here. So I'm just going to copy this tentative and I'm going to paste it in here. Looks great, right? Wrong. So if I go to open now all the colors are all fucked up. Don't do this. This annoys me. Okay. So what's important here is that you only copy paste from your own column, because all the colors and the rules that make those colors work will get pasted over as well, and there's no easy way to fix it. So please, please, please do not do that. But within your own column, you can copy paste at will. No big deal. Okay. I think that's all I have for driver availability. Any other questions before we talk about the overview? All right. Okay, back on the overview. Again, I know it looks like a lot, but to start with, you only have to change the stuff that's in yellow. Everything else is calculated. It does it for you. Okay, so just start with that, and then immediately it's not as complicated, right? So we'll start with the overall event config. Race duration, first of all, this time format, this number, colon, colon, number, that's important. You really have to put that in the right format, or Google will just freak out and everything will be wrong. Okay. Same thing down here. Um, until I figure out a way to let me do different time formats based on, because this is month, day, year. which is not my favorite way to do it, but it's the way it expects it right now. You do have to maintain this format. Do not do day, month, year. It will be strange, right? Okay. So basically what you're going to do, you're going to start out, I'm going to say, I want this to be 24 hours. Again, a common mistake that I see here is people do this, right? They say it's 24. Well, what just happened is now it thinks the race is 24 minutes long, which is going to cause problems, right? So you really need to make sure you've got hour, minute, and second. Otherwise, it's just not going to work right. Okay. So that's going to tell it how many stints are going to be required. It tells it how much time is required that it has to fill. Okay, the session start in GMT, this is when the session launches. Okay, so it sounds like since July or June, they've added more practice time, more registration time. So the session start could be quite early, right? But that's what this represents, is when does the session actually start. And then I'm actually going to skip down to the green flag offset because that's the second half of that conversation. The green flag offset is how long after the session started do you actually get the green flag? So if it's a 30-minute warm up or a 25-minute warm up, there's probably going to be a few minutes until the green flag, and you can update that green flag offset accordingly. It used to be about 30 minutes. It's pretty close. But that's how these two work together. Okay, so what's going to happen now is it's going to say the race start is going to be session start, 1 o'clock, plus 30 minutes of green flag offset. Now, if you go back to driver availability, remember I said it's going to start with where it thinks the green flag starts. We see the start time is at 1:30, not 1. So the session opened at 1, but it knows it had to add 30 minutes before it starts scheduling things because that's how long it's going to take to get to the green flag. Yep, yep, yep. Yeah. So with that information, it would literally just update it like so. Okay. I don't know. So now we get down. That brings up the next or the only thing that's left in this event config, which is the race start time of day. So this is in the simulator. What time did it start? Oh, uh, okay, sure. Well, it's gonna vary, right, based on the team. Yep. But yeah, so you would have to go through because now what has happened is the drive. It didn't know that it had to change any of this, right? It has no clue that it was supposed to change this. It just changed what when the half-hour increments started. So you would have to keep track of that. Okay. All right. So then race start time of day. So again, this has nothing to do with what time it was when you looked on your kitchen clock. Nothing at all. This is only inside the simulator. What time of day did it simulate when that session started? So if we say that it's going to simulate 2:30 p.m. on 122, then that is the in session time of day. So that's going to be useful for figuring out when's it going to get dark, right? So, and then we'll also talk about that a little bit of time of day lap factors. But that's the reason we track time of day is so, if you know you're 2 seconds faster per lap at 3 a.m. in sim, because the track is that much colder, it has to have some way of knowing that, hey, this stint occurs at 3 a.m. and we're supposed to do something special with it. So that's what this whole time of day business is all about. And again, we have these tooltips on every single label in here that tells you exactly what this is. In this case, race start time, according to in-game session time. Okay. TOD offset's just going to tell you how far off from the real time it was when you did look at your clock in your kitchen when you were getting ready to drive versus the in sim time. So in this case, it's just an hour 40 offset. As far as human beings are concerned, this is just for reference. It is used in some calculations, but it's nothing you really need to keep that much track of. Okay. So again, big takeaway there. Make sure you get this format right. Make sure you get the date formats right. Choose your choose your session time because as we just demonstrated, this used to say 1:30 here. right? And then we change it. Now it says 1250. Well, these might not be accurate anymore, right? So you really want to get that session nailed down first, okay? So everybody knows what time they're reporting. Okay, so then getting into the fuel stint config. So we can talk a little bit just like how does the sheet work? Why do you have to put these numbers in? Okay, so it's going to first figure out what the fuel tank size is. So what's the maximum amount of fuel? It's going to want to know how much fuel do you burn per lap. It's going to want to know how long do you take? What's the difference between a total pit time for a normal on track lap versus a lap where you took a pit stop. So how much extra time does that add? And then if tires have to happen after fuel, it's not concurrent. Some cars do fuel and tires at the same time. Some don't. If you need to add time to account for that when you take tires, that's what this is for. So it used to be a 30-second tire change in GTE that had to happen after fuel. So anytime that you say this fuel stint, I'm gonna, for this stint, I'm gonna change the tires, it would add 30 seconds for you. This doesn't have to be used for tire change. Really what this is it just says, hey, do you want me to add this amount of time to a stint or not, right? And we'll talk about that again in the schedule. You could technically use this for anything you want. It just happens to be most useful for tire change versus not changing tire. Okay. Okay, so now it has an idea how long a pit's going to take. It knows what the overall fuel size is. And there's two different types of laps that you can choose, with tires, without tires. If you choose with tires, should it add 30 seconds or not? Okay, so that's what you're setting up here. All right, once that's all set up, we can get into actually setting up the timing. Okay, so the idea here is your standard fuel stint should be roughly average of what all your drivers are capable of. Okay, so this is sort of your baseline lap time for your team. This is not the target time. This is not like a VRS, moonshot time. This is how roughly, on average, how long do you think it's going to take to get the car around the track? Because this is going to be the time that it uses when it says this is how long a lap time is for every single stint in the race, okay, by default. So if you don't change anything, you see it's got this formula up here, which you can change. What it's going to do by default is it's going to find every row here where it's got a name and a time, and it's just going to take the average lap times, okay? And that's what it's going to start you out with. If you want to overwrite it, you can. That's fine because it's yellow. So you can do that if you want. Just, again, pay really close attention to the format of the time. It wants hour, minutes, and seconds. You cannot skip any of those or it will go nuts. Okay. So if we want to, and we'll actually set this up with the times in a minute so you can see what that looks like. Otherwise, if you just keep track of what your individual drivers more or less do on average, within a couple of seconds, within a second or two, it will automatically update everything for you. Okay. Next big thing that's really, really important, fuel per lap. So what it's going to do some very basic math. It's going to take the fuel tank size, it's going to divide it by the fuel per lap, and that's telling you how many laps can you go on a standard fuel tank. Okay, so this is telling you how long your stints are, how many minutes they're going to take per stint, and about how much fuel are you expecting to burn over the course of that stint. Okay, a fuel saving stint is just a projection on. I think we can save 0.05 liters per lap, and it will take an extra 2 seconds to do. By default, it adds 1% to the time, and fuel you would have to put in yourself. So this is just 1% longer than what it thinks the average is. Okay. And then the time of day lap factors we'll talk about in a minute. That's probably the most confusing thing that's on this page. It's also completely optional, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Anything about per driver lap factors or just setting up these values so far? Any questions? Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and start plugging some of this stuff in. So I've got a session that Lyria did. I'm actually, you know what? I think I'm going to take one that's got a few more laps. We're picking on Larry here. So we had Yeah, right. I think this one had some longer stints on it. Let me just do this. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to go down here and I'm going to take a look at his fast laps and just kind of get a feel for what the fuel and setup and all that kind of thing look like. So I see here right away to figure out the fuel tank size. Obviously, if you're setting this up for your team, you can just get in the car and look at how big the fuel tank is and you're going to know, right? But I see that he had 105 liters, 105.8 liters at the end, and he consumed 3.87 liters. That tells me that this is a 110-liter fuel tank, right? So fuel tank size, the size of your vehicle's fuel tank, 110 liters. One note here, you note this does not say liters or gallons because it does not care. All right. So long as you are consistent with the number that you use for the fuel tank size and the number that you use to tell it how much fuel you burn per lap, it doesn't care because the math works out about the same for it, right? If you put gallons in one and liters in the other, you're going to be in a world of pain. But so long as you use the same unit of measure in both places, good to go. Okay. All right, back to VRS somewhere. Where do you go? Okay, so now we've got our fuel tank size, and we see just kind of eyeballing it about 3.5 liters per lap. So I'm just looking at, yeah, here we go. Okay, so we see fuel here. We see the consumed per lap. So we see pretty consistent, somewhere around 3.5 liters, right? Good enough. So we'll pop that in. 3.5 liters. We'll say let's say we can save 0.2 liters per lap, just kind of eyeballing that. And Larry has a time as well. What his time's looking like? 44s. So 44.8, 44.9. The other thing to keep in mind here is this is not your balls out pace. This is how long is it going to take you to get the car around the track. Okay. Well, in the endurance race, you are on a track with other cars, right? You're going to be getting passed by LMP2 or passing GT3 cars, and that's not going to be free. That's going to cost you some time, right? Coming up in traffic situations, again, facilitating passes, all that kind of thing. You're not going to be running your best golden lap on average, right? You're going to be dealing with a race, right? So if we're coming in at mid-high 44s, I'm going to call that 44.9, right? Because probably, if we're capable of running um, 44.7s and that kind of thing, it gives you a couple of tenths to work with, right? Or averaged over a stint. So if something took you 5 seconds to deal with over the course of a stint, that 5 seconds divided by the number of laps, it's probably going to come out about right. Okay. So I'm going to say Larry's got yeah, let's go at 44.9. So again, format, very important. 144.9. Okay. It should be your average, what you think the average is. And it just needs to be close-ish, right? You want it to be close enough where it can say, hey, if I use this time, am I going to have the right stint length? Am I going to have the right amount of time for you over the total length of laps in a stint or not? That's all this is, okay? So we can say, you can bump it up a little bit if there's some concern about that. And that's actually a good shout because then we can use that to talk about lap factors. So let's say this is really cold track. It takes an extra half a second and change. So we're going to bump it up to 45. And I just screwed up the time format, didn't I? See, this is why formats are important. Okay, so 145. Okay, so what are we seeing for these factors here? Why did all this change? Okay, so what's going to happen here is when you set this baseline, um, in your how long did a standard fuel stint take per driver, when you get their actual times, it will add or remove just a little bit of time based on how quick that driver is compared to the average. So let's say 45 is the baseline. So we'll say everyone's doing 45s. Now we see that factor is 1, right? Why is that? Because we said the average lap time is about 145, and all these guys are saying they're 145. Let's say um, Larry does Larry things, and he ends up 5 seconds a lap slower, right? Change this to a 150. You're going to see everybody else now runs 99% of the average lap time, and Larry, being Larry, runs 104% of the average lap time. You, as a driver or anything, do not need to care about these factors. What's important is when you go to assign a driver, it's going to add this math to how long it thinks the stint are going to be. So Larry's will get added a little bit of extra time. It's going to take 4% longer for Larry to finish his fuel stint than it's going to take Ash. It's going to take Ash almost 1% less time than average. Okay, and it can go the other way too. Let's say Larry actually buckles down and starts paying attention to things that I say. We can now see that everybody else is just a little bit over, 100%, and Larry's now running 1.5% faster than everybody else. So that's what these factors are. Okay, so um, basically, if you put in what you think the real average amount of time is, accounting for traffic, if accounting for fudge factor, give yourself a little extra window per driver, whatever their pace, it will automatically push and pull the stints when you assign that driver. Questions? Okay, so let's say everyone's doing about 145s. Now we talked about what happened if Larry did those laps in a really cold session. Okay, so this is where we get into the time of day lap factors. You do not have to use this, but it's available to you if you would like. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this down. Oops. Okay, I see what happened there. That's okay in this case. All right. So first of all, just what is each one of these rows? Okay. So we've got this time of day start. What's going to happen is it's going to go row by row. So it's going to say, okay, starting at 12 a.m. until, how long did you say the next one is? So starting from 12 a.m. until 4 a.m., this is how fast a lap is going to be. Okay. And then the next row is from 4 a.m. until the next time it sees. So from 4 a.m. until 11 a.m., this is how fast it's going to be. From 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., it will be this fast, and so on. Okay, so we can start with average time. Okay, so let's say it's going to be about 145. So we set everything to 145. And now we want to say, okay, at night, it's going to be 143s. Okay, so I'm going to say between 12 a.m. and 4 a.m. You see what happened here? It says, oh, your per lap is going to be 2 seconds faster, which happens to be about 2% faster. Okay, and that's going to happen in both night stints. So from 12 to 4 a.m., I want this to apply. From 4 a.m. to 11 a.m., I don't think so. Car will probably be the average lap time. Same thing from 11 to 6. It might actually get slower, right? So let's say an afternoon from 11 a.m. to 6, maybe it takes an extra second because the track's hot. We can see now it's adding 1% to all the stints that are going to occur between 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. It's just going to do that automatically for you. Okay, regardless of who's driving, it's going to add another percent because we've said hot tires is 1% slower, basically. Okay, so we got another night stint here from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. Again, that's my 143. Okay, so now what's going to happen again? From 12 a.m. to 4 a.m., it's going to assume the average lap time is 143. From 4 a.m. to 11 a.m., it's going to assume the average time should be 145. From 11 to 6, it's going to say it should take 46. From 6 to 9, 145. And then again, we're back on cold tires from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. So it's back to 143. Any questions? All right. All right. You do not have to use this is the other thing. I mean, that's kind of the big takeaway. If you just don't care, you're not being that competitive, or for whatever reason, you don't want to deal with this, just set them to your average lap time. Okay. And then you never have to think about it again. And now it's not going to make any difference. It'll just do the same time the whole event. Okay, so you don't have to use this, but if you want to make cold tires a little quicker lap and you want to make hot tires a little slower lap, you can if you would like. Okay, excuse me. Just going through my notes. We talked about units. We talked about tire change time. Doesn't necessarily need to be used for tires. We went through VRS and we got our lap times and our fuel information. One thing I do want to talk about, pit duration. This is usually something that you can take. This is intended for the tool. What it wants to know is if you pit, how much more time was that? Okay. So that has to account for the total extra time it was. So the time that you spent going into pit lane, if it's slower than a normal lap, account for that. How long did it take you to get to your pit box? How long were you in your pit box? How long did it take to get to the exit cones and then back up to speed? It doesn't care about all those parts. It cares about the total amount of time it took to do all that versus not doing any of it. Okay. And then it's going to add one time per stint. It's going to add this amount of time because it's going to assume that you're going to come in and you're going to need to pit and it's going to take this long. Okay. Everything else you can pretty much get from VRS or your telemetry or just looking at your practice session. Okay, so we talked about time of day factors. Now we get into the fun part. Okay, so we're all set up. We figured out when we're going to race. We've gone through the roster. Our drivers have told us what their GMT offsets are and how many back-to-back stints they're willing to do. They've selected a color and we've updated all that. They've gone through driver availability and they've told me what times of day they are or are not available to drive. Now it's time to start scheduling. Okay. So this will automatically update with the available drivers. Again, I'm going to pick on Klaus. Remember I talked about those stint preferences? Okay. So this is where you see their preference for back-to-back stints. Right now I have him set up for 2. If I go and try to do 3 back-to-back stints, you see that this turns red. This turned red because on the roster, Klaus said he only wants to do 2 in a row. You can schedule him for 3, but it's going to tell you, hey, are you sure about that? Right? Because they said their preferences too. Okay. Anything that has to do with this driver, specifically in localized time, is always going to change and color code with the driver. So if I change this to anyone else, you see the colors change accordingly. Doesn't really help if I just keep selecting the same driver. So you can see all of this changes. And the driver availability here is, again, this is it processed everything that it's on the driver availability tab and lined it up with the appropriate stints. And if any of them were blocked, it'll show up as blocked. If there was any combination of open and tentative, it'll show tentative. And if there is only open, and only if it was only open, will it show them as open for the schedule. And if you happen to schedule somebody who's blocked, you're going to see this red. Again, red, bad, green, good. Okay, so Tom's is green because open. Open is good. You have not made a mistake. D was blocked at this time. You scheduled them. You have made a mistake. So it is red. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about pushing and pulling the laps a little bit. First of all, I am going to set up just so you can kind of see how these factors work. Let's see. We'll pick on Larry again. We're going to make him 5 seconds slower just to make it really, really obvious. Okay. So now back on the schedule, we're going to see the uh, length of the time of the drive is going to change dramatically based on who's driving. Okay. And if you watched all these numbers down here, because Larry takes longer to do a whole stint, all of these times will change to account for the fact that hey, Larry took an extra, minute or whatever it was to finish his stint versus Klaus, who would do it quicker. Okay. This also happens during time of day. So if I say, let's make it really, really obvious. I'm just going to do like a super silly change. So let's say he takes 2 minutes just to like really make the data pop and be super obvious. Okay, so we see that these are supposed to be, 31-minute laps. It was supposed to end at 2:39. This stint was supposed to end at 3:33 by default. But if I schedule Larry, again, remember, this is 3:33. Now this ends at 3:41 because we've set Larry to do so much longer laps. It takes him so much longer that it changed this end time accordingly. And if this end time changed, that means the start time for the next stint also changed. And the sheet handles all of that for you. Okay. Now, conversely, if we say Larry is just super, super quick, we're going to go ahead and use one other feature here. See this highlight on the left? If for any reason you're interested in a given row, you can click that and it will highlight it for you. So we can see right now again, the actual end was supposed to be 3:41. If I go the other way, just for Larry, so nobody else's changes, times are going to change, just for Larry. If I say Larry does laps now 5 seconds faster than everyone else, now we're going to see that that end timed changed to 3:36. Okay, so it will push and pull based on the assigned driver. So if you've got a very fast driver and a very slow driver on the same team, it's going to account for how much time is supposed to between the start and end based on how quick that driver is. The same thing can happen if we now assign Larry to a different time. I'm just going to go ahead and copy him down. Okay, so let's find one of those times that we think it's going to be much faster, right? So starting at about 12 a.m. until 4 a.m. or so, right? One other note with this highlighting, this also carries over into driver availability. You want to see which stints are currently mapped to driver availability. You can see it's already highlighted for you. This is all of the half-hour increments that are involved in the stints that we have selected on the schedule. Okay, so what's going to happen here is we're going to say these are going to be faster laps. So we're going to see the times for all of these drop if we go to the overview and we add a time of day lap factor. Okay, so I'm going to say between 12 a.m. and 4 a.m. We run minute and 30. Unrealistic, but just to really make the data change a lot. Now, if we go back to the schedule, we're going to see that for these and only these stints, the time is dramatically shortened, right, compared to all the other stints. Okay, and that's because this falls within that time of day that we had applied and said that these laps need to be faster. And we can see the factor that it's applying is now 0.83, whereas everywhere else it was like 0.97 based on the time of day. Okay, but for these ones, we know the car is much faster. And we know it's faster because we said so right here. Okay. So that's how the whole time of day thing factors in. That's how the driver per driver times factor in. Any questions on that so far? Okay. Silence is acceptance. Okay, so we'll put these back to more reasonable times again. All right. So now we're back to everybody having pretty normal times. No big deal. Okay, so now as the race is happening, so that's basically all the setup work. That's all the pre-work you have to do. And you never have to touch any of the scheduling or any of the overview ever again. Okay, once it has all this information, it's good to go. During the race, you will not have to touch this. Okay, what you do have to touch during the race is this is a perfect blue sky scenario for every single stint. So it assumes that over on the overview, you said an average stint is 145. This driver does 145 laps. I know there's 110 liters in the tank, and you burn 3.5 liters per tank. If that is all perfectly exactly true for this whole stint, then it will end at 145. Okay. If anything happens, you crash, you shank a corner, you loop it, you get stuck behind some traffic, this could very well be later. Okay. So I'm taking my best guess right now based on perfect blue sky ideal scenario when nothing happened. That's probably not going to be correct. Right. So if this does need to change, there is a formula in there by default, but you can override this and should override it if it ends up being different. So let's say Stint 2, Klaus was supposed to be in the car until 2:41. Let's say he bins it, on the, halfway through. Okay, so it's supposed to be 31 laps, like lap 16, 17, he binned it. It was supposed to be almost an hour long. It ended up being done at, let's just say 2:20. Okay, so, okay, hold on. I went the wrong way. Oh, that's right. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so it'll finish early, and it will be like, hooray, you finished 21 minutes early. And now, if you see when I did that, you see the start times for all these moved, right? Because the stint ended 20 minutes early. So that means that the stint had to start 20 minutes earlier. So again, you watch this time. By default, it was supposed to start at 2:41, but because the stint before it ended early, now it starts at 2:20, and that same change applied to all these other stints. Okay. Same thing happens with the laps. We were supposed to do 31 laps, but we had an oops. We only did 17 laps. Okay. So it's going to keep track of that. It's going to use that to figure out if you have any problems with fair share now that they didn't do all the laps they were supposed to, and that sort of thing. Okay. If you took damage during that event, and you found out that it added, 3 seconds of damage, again, you can overwrite this and say, hey, we're 3 seconds slower now, and it's going to apply 3 seconds longer to every single stint. Okay. So by default, you don't have to do anything, but as things happen, and they will happen, um, basically you're going to keep track of when did the stint actually end. So this is when did the car get back on track at speed, and how many laps did you actually do? I'm taking my best guess here based on the math, but the real world stuff happens. So these two columns is like 99% of what you have to do during the race. Just when the car leaves the pits, make sure you got the actual end if it's different. This current GMT, everything runs on GMT here. This GMT is accurate to the minute, always. Just make sure you plug that in this format. And then again, if the actual laps changed, you can put in the actual laps that were actually done. And if the car's slower at any point in the race and you expect it to continue to be slower until the end of the race, you can add a damage modifier, and then it will calculate the rest for you. Uh, okay. I think that's it. I have covered all of the things that I wanted to do on my checkbox for the technical stuff that's involved in the sheet. Any questions about general operation, how it functions? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the idea here is, so again, when in doubt, tooltips, right? So the actual end is going to be when did the car leave the pits? So if you had a crash and you're in the pits for 2 hours, you're going to put in the actual end time here because that stint took 3 hours to finish, right? Because you spent 2 hours in the pits and an hour on track or whatever it was. Okay. And when you do that, it will update all these times. And then what's going to happen is if these times got updated into a point where somebody's blocked, so let's say I'm going to do Klaus here. And the reason I'm going to do Klaus is because he's open right now, but on the next stint, he's supposed to be blocked. Now, if I say um, Larry, being Larry, bin the car. He was supposed to be done at 11:04 p.m. He bins the car. The car's in the pits for a half hour. Okay. It's supposed to be 11:04. Now it's 11:34. Okay. So it updated this and said, hey, that took 29 minutes longer than it was supposed to. And now the next stint starts 29 minutes later. You had Klaus scheduled. Klaus can no longer drive the stint, okay, because he said he's blocked. And the schedule is going to tell you that that just happened. So now, as the team manager, it's incumbent upon you to go and talk to Klaus and be like, hey, if I send you a T-shirt, will you do the stint? Or find somebody else to drive for him and update whoever's scheduled. But this is all dynamic all the time. It's always pushing, pulling the times and comparing against driver availability to let you know if you've got a problem. And then for the damage thing, that would be if you also took damage here, you would just put in how many seconds per lap do you think the car is slower. So whatever you put in here will be multiplied by 31 because 31 laps. So if you say it's a second slower lap now, you'll get an extra 31 seconds per stint. If I were to do this, so that's 1 second slower per lap. Everything just got 31 seconds slower. All of these stints, all the way down. And you can see what the final impact is here. This is one of the other features. It does keep track of, I'm just going to do Ash here. It does keep track of how many laps it thinks the final stint is going to be. Again, based on your fuel burn and fuel tank size and all that kind of thing. So if we have an issue where the car is 1 second slower per lap, well, that's 31 seconds, depending on when it happened, 31 seconds, 31 seconds, 31 seconds, 31 seconds. That's several minutes, right? So that's probably going to end up impacting how many laps you do total in the car, right? Because you can't get all the laps that we thought you were going to get done because the car's too slow. So if we get into that situation, again, so Larry incurs damage that causes the car to be exactly 1 second slower or real close to 1 second slower per lap. We're going to see this change from 25 laps for the final stint to just 20 because you're not going to have to. You lost 5 minutes of time. You lost 5 laps of time due to that extra second per lap for all of these stints. Does that make sense? So every single one of these stints was 31 seconds longer because 31 times 1 second. And you add that all up, it came out to be about 5 laps worth of damage at the end of the race. Clear as mud. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it wouldn't be a huge difference. And again, when you're looking at these overviews, you're really going for what's the average it's going to take the whole team in general for both the lap time and the fuel time, right? So if you take everybody together and you figure out rough ballpark, if if you do 20, you do 100 laps, you got 10 drivers doing 10 laps each. What was the average between all 10 of them for that whole 100 laps? Okay, that's the number that you're trying to capture here. So if some drivers are a little better on fuel, some are a little bit worse, you would try to shoot for the average here. If you're really going to be cutting it close on fuel, like someone's getting comfortable with fuel saving for the last few laps and they kind of like sputter into the pit box, I would say probably still leave it at average. And you can add an extra lap for them if you want, if they think that they're going to be capable of doing it. So what might happen in that case? Let's say Klaus is just fucking killing it, right? He's able to do 32 laps. You would just say that the actual lap count is 32 here, and now it knows that you've accounted for an extra lap. Your actual end's probably going to be different because you went the extra lap. So tell it that you went the extra minute or whatever it is, and it will update the rest of the schedule. Mm. Yeah, I mean the math is what it is, right? I mean it's really dead simple conceptually, right? It takes you this many liters to burn, and you've got this many liters in the tank. You do the division, that's your laps. It's never going to be that far off. Mhm. Now, actually, one thing I should talk about though, if you do have somebody who's really quick, you could set them up as a fuel saving stint though, if you really wanted to. So that's the idea of, generally speaking, if someone's using less fuel, they're probably a little bit slower too, right? Because they're fuel saving. So on the schedule, I didn't talk about that. You do have stint type. So this is standard with tires. So you've got standard tires and no tires. So again, with the tires, it's do you want to add that 30 seconds or no, right? So tires and no tires, and then you've got standard and fuel saving. So if I say fuel saving with tires, we see that this was supposed to end at 1:45, but I'm going to do a fuel saving stint, so it's going to take a little bit longer because I'm going to be lifting into the corners and that kind of thing, right? So we'll see that it's supposed to end at 1:45. If I say this is a fuel saving now, we see that this took an extra 5 minutes over the course of those laps, but I got an extra 2 laps. That would be really, really aggressive with fuel saving, but that's how you can account for it. And then what would happen if they're still really, really fast is just update the actual time. Just keep track of when they actually left the pits, and it will be balls on accurate for the rest of the race. And then to talk about the tires, no tires, we said 30 seconds, right? So if I say fuel saving, no tires, it subtracted 30 seconds. Change my mind, do tires again, added 30 seconds. Okay, any other technical questions? Mhm. Being more precise. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can just so long as nobody knows who you are and looks at the race results. So I would suggest probably just changing your name. So okay, like legally. So all right. So I think that's it for how to use the sheet in general. If there's any more questions about, how do I change if you have some race scenarios you want to go through, I can explain how you would deal with that. But it really comes down to just make sure you're very accurate with when you tell the spreadsheet the car left the pits. And if you haven't been accurate for like 10 stints or something, it's fine. Whenever you finally notice, tell it when the stint actually ended, and it will adjust everything for you. It's best if you do it every stint, but if you miss one or two, it's not the end of the world. It just means those two stints are not going to be accurate. Let's say um, Softy and Klaus didn't know that they're supposed to update this, and they were both 5 minutes late. So that's an extra 10 minutes that it took to get here. That's fine. Just here, go ahead and say, hey, this was actually 3:47 p.m. And I'll say, here's your extra, 9-10 minutes that you didn't account for up here. And now everything, and it offset this by 10 minutes. So now everything below it is correct. So longer term goal, the idea was supposed to be to create a iRacing app that would sit in the SDK and watch for your car to leave the pits and update this for you, because that's really all the that's the work, quote unquote work, that you have to do during the race. Okay. It is. Yeah, and I found it just being a pain in the ass too. Yep. Because you're just like staring at the car, waiting for it to leave as the pit chief, and you're like, shit, how many minutes with that, right? Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why this is up here. So this is the time that you want to plug in, right? But yeah, it is. It's a really small, trivial thing to do, but it does. On like hour 21, it's like, oh my god, it's just one more thing I don't want to have to do. So. Mhm. Yep. Perfect. Yep. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, that would be awesome. That would actually be awesome to reference from here too. Being actually, just mention it exists when it's ready. Yep, I hear you. Well, this version isn't ready either. So, if I think I mentioned in the Discord, but if you didn't catch that, you guys dog fooding this for me is the price that I'm demanding for the support. So, because I haven't actually run this version yet, this was a huge overhaul to the guts of how it worked. So anything that pops up, I am on hand the whole weekend to assist. But yeah, there might be some little niggles here and there that I just haven't worked through yet. Okay, so I think that's it for the technical stuff. real quick, I want to talk about these first two tabs. I just kind of forgot to hide them because it's sort of a half-baked idea for me. Things you should really be talking about your team with today, and I mean today. Like start getting the messaging out and get people thinking about it because you're probably gonna have some conversations that you didn't realize you needed to have. Okay. So talking about strategy, who's gonna qualify, right? You would be amazed how many teams I have worked with where it came to the day of the race and they're like, who's signing up? You don't want to have that conversation while registration is happening, right? You wanted to know that a week in advance, right? So they can prepare, they can be in the right headspace to be on track with 55 cars that, because those first hour or two is still pretty brutal, like a normal sprint race. So you want to make sure that you've got the drivers prepared for that. Who all's registering, that's no longer really a concern because you have to pre-register. That used to be a question, right? And that's also where the I ratings used, why I used to capture the I rating, because you used to pick and choose which drivers you wanted to have qualify so you could hit your target I rating, which is nice if you were running a lot of cars, you want to get them in the same split, but no longer applicable. Team goals. This is one of those that you really need to start talking about right now, tonight, today, this hour, okay? Um, most of the teams I expect are going to be um, not deadly serious competitive. Okay, my expectation, and some teams will decide, for themselves what they want to do. My guess is most teams probably want to set a goal to just finish the race, right? Just get the car home, and that is a hell of an achievement for a first time or the first couple times in an endurance race. I don't know what the washout rate is on first time drivers trying to get through an endurance, but it's high, right? So it's a hell of an achievement to get the car across the line. Have that conversation with your team. What are they trying to do? Are they going for a top five? Do they want to put in, the 200 hours of practice that's required to be ultra competitive in your split and go for those podiums? Do they just want to have a really good time and support a charity and feel the camaraderie and all that, which is more likely with this event, but have that conversation so it's not a surprise. Okay. Along those same lines, retirement conditions is not something that you want to be arguing about while the car is in a smoking heap in the pits. Okay. So talk about what are the conditions upon which you're going to withdraw from the race. So somebody doesn't wake up at 3 a.m. and find out that there is no car for them and they wanted to drive it and you didn't know. Okay. My default rule for this is if the car, well, to start with, we're finishing the race. Like every team that I've run and I'm driving on, my goal is we are going to finish the race, right? The car might be, pretty jacked up, but we're going to finish the race. My retirement condition would be the car is unsafe, right? If I am unsafe on track, either to myself or other cars, then we have to retire the car, right? I don't want to take other teams out of the race just because I really wanted to get to the end. Each individual team's probably going to have their own opinion. When do you hit the withdraw button? Have that conversation now. Do not have it during the race. Trust me, it's a big bucket of drama you don't want to have in the thick of it. You want to have those expectations set before the green flag drops. Backup communications. I have had Discord become unavailable to us multiple times in endurance races. Make sure that you have another way to get a hold of each other if Discord is not viable. That could be joining the race session and making sure that you've got a team channel set up in the race so people can join it and just get on the team chat and get a hold of you if Discord's not going to work. Um, Maybe you want to do TeamSpeak or something. If you're really competitive, you really want to make sure that's up there. Just have a plan. If for some reason Discord's not going to work, what are you going to do, right? Setups, excuse me. I have provided a folder in the Google Drive for the setup that you want to use for the race. So this is on all your development setups, all that kind of thing. This is the link to the setup that is going to be on the car when you get in, right? Really helpful to have that for reference. Practice schedule, this is just having the conversation with your team, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. They all have the same expectations. Um, the checklist page, this is for when you're doing driver change in pit stops, right? Seems like really, really basic stuff. Every single thing on this list is because I fucked it up personally, at least once. Okay. It's the same thing with me with, like, I call it my pre-flight check. When I'm getting in the car, I check, Are my tires unchecked? Is my fuel unchecked? In skip arbor, because there's no, whatever. Or if I'm in a league race where there is a pit stop, is my pit stop set up correctly? Are my tires set up correctly? Is my quick repair set up correctly? All these kind of things I go through because I've gotten every single one of those things wrong a bunch of times. So now I have to go through a checklist. Same thing happens with endurance racing for doing driver swaps and pit stops. Okay. Um, so before you get in the car, do a quick check if it's your first stint for the event. Is all of the applications and all of your environment working correctly? Does crew chief work? Right? Do you have force feedback? I've had times where I went in and found out I had a driver issue with my wheel, didn't have force feedback. Do you have audio? Do you have all the things that you're going to need to do the race? Do a quick check before you get in the car. Okay. And then two-way checks, right? So here, this is for the driver who's in the car, right? You're going to check and make sure that tire and fuel is set properly. If you've decided that this is a full stint with 4 tires and full fuel, just quick check, make sure that's right. And then confirm with the person who's coming in that they see the same thing. Okay, are all the in-car settings correct? Again, you look and you ask the person who's coming in to look as well. Just double check each other, make sure you're right. Do you know who's going to be driving behind you? You should, because that's on the schedule. And then, as you're sitting there, you want to wait for the incoming driver to remove you. Don't exit the car. Wait for them to kick you out of the car, just because there's some strange bugs that can sometimes happen. And then, make sure that you updated those end times. So anything else that you want to add to this list, do it. That's part of your team conversation. This is kind of half baked. I didn't actually intend to have these in here, but these are the questions that I have my drivers go through every single time they're doing a driver swap. Okay, that's it. Thanks for attending my TED Talk. Any questions? Okay. All right, I'll wrap up there. Any more questions? I'm not hard to get a hold of. Just ping me in Discord, what have you, and we'll jump on a channel and I'll get you sorted out. All right. Sure. Mhm. Mhm. Okay. All right. Cool. I think we're in good shape. I'm going to call it there. Thanks, guys.